Yo, what up guys, in this video we're going to be covering all of the important matchups that I've played on my Jayce journey, and I'm going to be giving you guys a matchup guide about all of these matchups so you can understand what you need to do in the early game on Jayce. And we're going to be covering starting items, runes for each matchup, mindset that we can adopt when playing this matchup, how we want to be playing the early waves, kind of micro interactions that reside within the matchup, or trading tips that I can give you. That's the stuff that we're all going to be covering. I'm going to be putting timestamps below so you can basically go to each matchup before you load into game when you pick Jayce. Going to be very hyper efficient for you guys, and I hope you guys enjoy. Let's start with the first matchup. We're starting off with Zed, and against Zed we want to start with Doran's Blade. Doran's Blade is necessary because it gives us that early lane power, but especially the early game health, and that will allow us to actually survive Zed's all-in combos. So as for runes, we can take both First Strike and Phase Rush depending on what the enemy team basically asks for us to do. And our mindset in this lane is actually to get as big of a CS advantage as possible on Zed before level 6. And we gotta always keep in mind that's possible, right? Because we are still not the strongest early game champion. And that means that we are very vulnerable to ganks or to Zed trades when his W is up. So what we want to be doing with the waves is we want to ideally be, I think, stacking 2 and really trying to zone Zed off just like Faker does in this vault is actually perfect. But if Zed respects really well, we could theoretically also go for a 3-stack, or if the enemy has a very high threat jungle. And in that case, we're just trying to play for the CS advantage and try to bully him under tower on the 3-stack, which is also completely fine. As for trades, we want to be very careful when Zed has W up. That's usually when we lose trades. So when he has W up, we want to bait it out and not really go for anything crazy. But if his W is down, we can really step up and look for these massive trades into him. So main cooldown to talk about is the ZW cooldown. And when it comes to mindset, post level 6, we're just trying to stay on range. We're not really going to be doing much crazy stuff into Zed because then his kill threat is extremely high. And then we just want to be playing with our poke and playing with our insane wave clear. Still, always keep in mind, be careful of his W. The next matchup is going to be Katarina. So against Katarina, we can practically do a bit more different things. We can start with Longsword Refillable Potion, but we can also start with Doran's Blade. To get a bit more of that early game strength depending on how we want to play. What's really important in this matchup is as well that we also decide the runes and the way we want to be playing depending on what the enemy team basically asks us to do. So if we're playing against a very early game heavy aggressive team and we need to chill back, we can go for First Strike and we go for Refillable Potion Longsword. But if we play against a team where we can actually go a bit more aggressive early, Phase Rush with Doran's Blade is also really good to take against Katarina and to try to get an advantage in the early game. That's also something that we know right here and that we can see. We want to be playing the waves in the early game. We want to just zone her off as I do right here. We want to be zoning her off the wave. We want to be standing up very aggressively, make sure that she preferably lose some XP. And every time she walks up, we can then look to trade onto her. So the mindset in the early game is that we want to be playing very aggressive into Katarina. And we do want to be a bit careful once she reaches level 3, because her level 3, usually mainly with Conqueror, is actually really strong. And that's when we want to respect. And after that, what we can do is we can actually hold the wave onto our side. So a 2 or a 3-stack into bouncing it out back onto our side is usually the ideal play into Katarina. Then with our mindset, early game, we want to be playing to win. And this is a matchup that if we have the wave in a good position constantly, we can actually be harassing her all the time whenever she tries to contest the wave state. That's one of Kata's weaknesses, especially before level 7, before level 8. She has very low wave control, and we can abuse that to actually win this matchup pretty hard because we have a lot of damage compared to the Katarina as well. We both are basically full damage champion with very low utility. And we should win that because we have the range advantage if we play it well. As for trades, be very careful with her daggers. And it's really important that we have the wave in the correct position when we look for these trades. because if the wave is in a bad position and she's able to chase us down the long lane with Conqueror, we can actually die to her all-ins, and that's basically the only position where we're really, really vulnerable. I show it right here on screen. I walk up right here very, very far up, and Kata could actually go and trade onto me. And I'm pretty sure that because I did not have all of my cooldowns, that I was in a lot of danger right here, and she had definitely had kill threat onto me. So always be careful with our positioning. Next up, we got Akali. Akali's a pretty tricky matchup for Jayce because of her ability to survive in the early lane with Doran's Shield and Second Wind. But the main thing that worked for me against Akali is actually Doran's Blade Start, because it gives us that additional health and that additional strength to actually trade a bit more into her and really abuse our range advantage in the early game. As for runes, I think both First Strike and Phase Rush once again are really, really good into Akali, depending on what the composition of the enemies ask us to take. We can play for poke or we can play for a bit more skirmish heavy. Both is completely fine. Our mindset in the early lane is that we want to play to beat the Akali early by taking proper trades. And the most important thing in this matchup is understanding the trading pattern that we want to go for as Jayce. So Jayce has a very particular trading pattern against Akali, which is crucial to understand, and that's actually that we want to only use Hammer Q and not auto attack after. I'll show it right here. Only use Hammer Q, not auto attack after, because if we auto attack, we're going to commit. And now we actually use the Hammer Q to just slow the Akali, and we can then run away from her and do not give her an additional Q, basically. So it's a massive difference if we do not go for that hammer auto attack after we go for the Hammer Q. That's the main tip into Akali. Another tip that we can have into Akali, look at this. It's very, very hard for her to play. And another tip into Akali is getting an early Hex Drinker will really, really spin the matchup in our favor. Because then it's just really hard for her to all-in us. And that's basically what Akali wants to do. She wants to all-in us before we basically have the time to react towards her combos. Hex Drinker is really, really good. As for waves, we want to go for an early 3-stack. In my opinion, has worked the best. And if we can get a proper 3-stack with a bounce and then just extend the laning phase a little bit, we're in the best possible position. Next up, we got Qiyana. Qiyana is very similar as these other assassins that we just discussed. Against assassins, of course, we want to be starting Doran's Blade. And I think into Qiyana, we can also run First Strike or Phase Rush, depending on what the enemy team composition asks for us to take. So it's preference in that aspect. So the mindset into Qiyana is really bully her level 1, 2, and 3. In my opinion, a 3-stack has worked best into Qiyana, because with a 3-stack we can really harass her in the tower when she's level 2 and we are level 3. And we do not want to be 2-stacking into Qiyana usually, unless she gives us a lot of room to actually harass her, because that way she has the possibility to play with the bounce, reach level 3 and really zone us off the minion wave and really get the crash. It's really annoying. Even though that my favorite rune page into Qiyana is actually Phase Rush with Bone Plating. I think Bone Plating is really high value against Qiyana. And as for the mindset that I adopt, I really try to pressure her pre-level 6. And the way we do it is by a 3-stack and then letting the wave come back into us. And after that, once she reaches level 6, she actually has a lot of kill threat onto us. So we need to be very careful at that point. And what we want to be doing then is we want to be just avoiding trades with her and just go for only poke trades from Fog of War. So we use our superior wave clear to get the wave clear advantage and to then really get into that Fog of War and just start poking her down. A good example is right here. This is the way we want to be playing against Qiyana when we get to the point where we're able to do that. We just shove the wave in, right? Very hard for her to react. We then sit in Fog of War. We look for this poke, and Qiyana basically cannot play into us, and we should take complete lane domination. Very important in this matchup as well, right, is if she gets ahead, we're going to be pretty screwed. So keep in mind of the snowball aspect of this lane, and then you should be fine. Next up, we got Ekko. And Ekko is actually a pretty good matchup for Jayce in my opinion. My preferred rune to take into Ekko is actually Phase Rush with Bone Plating as well, because it really fucks with Ekko's trading patterns. And I also like to take Doran's Blade because of the additional health and the early game strength that it gives us. So into Ekko, ideally we want to be playing to win as well. That's our mindset in this lane. We do want to be careful about Ekko's Q. That's the very important cooldown that we need to be aware of, because Ekko revolves all around Q in the lane. If his Q is down, we have freedom to walk up. If his Q is up, we need to be quite careful, because then he can go for a very nasty trade combo. So into Ekko, we want to be going for a 2 or a 3 stack, depending on how much damage he gives us in the early game, and try to bounce the wave out after and try to keep it on our side. One thing to keep in mind is we want to be playing fast into Ekko, but if the wave is on his side and enemy jungler is very strong in the early game, we do, of course, got to be very, very careful with pushing in to Ekko. In this game, it's going to be my demise. Yes, I have pressure early. Yes, I'm beating the Ekko 1v1, but as you can see, I'm getting ganked, and it's painful like this. Just really, really painful. Post level 6, right? Post level 7, level 6, we want to be chilling a little bit with the trades. Of course, if he misuses his Q in the lane, we can definitely still go for these trades like this, where he misses his Q. We can just go in, get this beautiful trade, and get out. But we mainly want to be starting to play from poke, because we just completely outrange the Ekko, and that's when we really are in the best possible situation. Let's move on. If you really isolate the lane, Talon is probably one of the easiest lanes for Jayce, because in the early game, Talon doesn't have the strength to beat Jayce in trades because of how much damage Jayce has, because of his E, the self-peel that Jayce provides, and because of the fact that the hammer form of Jayce just gives him additional resistances, which is really, really good against Talon. And post level 6, like, he can find some angles where he can one-shot us. But as for starting items, like, it's an assassin, pretty straightforward. We want to be starting Doran's Blade, because it just gives us the additional health, which is really, really helpful in these lanes. We want to be looking for a 2 or 3 stack, depending on what he gives us and how much damage that he gives us in the early lane, and really try to get some damage off onto him. What we want to keep in mind is when we're playing against a Talon, we're playing to win, but we got to be very careful with his W. If he lands both parts of his W, he can get a very nasty trade up on us. So it's really important that we actually tether his W in a way that he can only hit one part of the W onto us. If he hits both parts onto the Ws, he can Q onto us and he can get a very nasty trade. That's something we want to avoid. So it's okay to walk up, but after you see right here, he only lands one part of the W. He cannot really get that massive trade onto us. So that's a good window that we can just walk up and not be scared. As for, well, once we get to that level 6, level 7 mark, then of course we got to be a bit more careful. Our poke becomes really strong then, and we can just play for shoving the wave, ducking into side, and looking to poke the Talon. A good example once again right here. We get a beautiful reset, and what we can see is we just shove the wave, he gets into lane, we poke him, we go out of vision, he gets back into lane, we just try the wave clear right now, he uses his abilities, that's completely fine, and now once again we look for more poke, and it puts a lot of pressure on the Talon, because it's not like he can really do much, he doesn't really have too much to say in this lane, he doesn't have the wave clear to match us. It doesn't really have the damage to match us if we just decide to avoid his W, which is the most important thing into Talon. And of course in team fights, be very careful of his flanks. And if we really struggle staying alive against Talon, we can always go Tabis, which just makes it even harder for him to kill us. Kassadin is without a doubt the easiest matchup in the game for Jayce. We can beat him at any stage of the game with our insane damage, and he of course doesn't really fare well against AD champions. So our starting items into Kassadin can be a longsword fillable potion or Doran's Blade if you feel like you need additional strength early. Both is completely fine on what you want to be playing. As for runes, we can also take both First Strike or Phase Rush. If you feel like you can get away with First Strike and get more money with it, feel free, be my guest, go ahead. But if you feel like you want Phase Rush because it's particularly good against the enemy team, that's also completely fine. So as for the mindset, we just want to be playing to make Kassadin's life as hard as possible during the entire game. So what do I prefer to play into him? I prefer to go for a 2-stack, and then we just pressure him under tower. We can either decide to perma shove into him, or we can decide to 2-stack into a bounce and then try to hold the wave on our side. Both strategies are completely valid. as long as our goal is to just like zone him off CS. And even post 6, he's got to be very careful. He cannot really just go and ult in because we just do too much damage for him. And my preferred strategy into Kassadin is usually, unless I get a lot of damage off level 1 and 2, is usually I just want to keep pushing and harassing him. And mainly after he's used his first TP, he's in a lot of trouble. But if he takes a lot of damage, right here, for example, we can just bounce the wave out and he's pretty fucked. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing. We just bounce the wave out and he's going to be in a lot of trouble. We land a beautiful Q right here. He steps up and that leads to me getting a nice solo kill. And it's just over right now because we're just going to be doing insane amounts of damage, which is not going to be able, he's not going to be able to withstand that. If we play good waves, take good quality trades, there's practically no way for us to lose this matchup. Next up is LeBlanc. And LeBlanc is actually a very hard matchup for Jayce. I'm going to be explaining why in a second. As for starting items, we want to be taking Doran's Blade because we need the additional health and lane sustain against the LeBlanc. As for runes, well, we can go First Strike, or we can go Airy, or we can go Phase Rush. Anything is possible as long as we understand that we're not going to be really playing for lane. First, Phase Rush isn't really good for us LeBlanc because she just changes up and we cannot really utilize the movement speed. So we're not really going to be taking runes for lane, but rather for out of lane. What's best in the game? That's what we're going to be taking against LeBlanc. So the mindset against LeBlanc is that we just want to be scaling up. We want to be avoiding her being able to take massive trades onto us. And we just want to poke her out because LeBlanc gets reduced in threat the lower HP that she is. So if we can take good quality trades into her, where we don't take too much damage ourselves, we're actually in a good position. As for waves, we do not want to be shoving into LeBlanc in the early game. I got a vote right here from one of my MLA students, and he actually decided to shove into LeBlanc, and it's going to be his death. We cannot shove into LeBlanc. We don't have the wave clear to actually outpush her. We'll just get ganked, we'll get rooted up by her chain, and there's nothing for us to do. So what we want to be doing is we want to just keep the wave on our side, try to keep it there as long as possible, and if it ever bounces out towards LeBlanc, we want to be making sure that we actually try to crash it. If the wave is on our side, she also struggles taking very good trades into us, but if the wave is going towards her side, she can actually just really nail us with these trades. So why is LeBlanc so good into Jayce? She's so good into Jayce because of certain trading patterns. We cannot really utilize our hammer form into LeBlanc because if we jump into her, she, as we can see right here, we're going to be jumping into LeBlanc. She can just chain us up and she can then just stick onto us and get a massive trade onto us. So we cannot really utilize hammer form. And what LeBlanc can also do is she can just W onto us. And if the Jayce then decides to Q, she can just W back and she'll just completely flat out ignore the damage that Jayce throws onto her. So this matchup, just completely play with the mindset, okay, I just want to be scaling, I just want to be poking, and I want to be avoiding taking trades from her. Once we have mercs, once we have some MR, once we can really avoid the big damage that she can do onto us, that's when we can really use our wave clear to actually put pressure onto her. But before that, not really. Main thing to keep in mind in this matchup is LeBlanc's W and LeBlanc's R cooldown once she's level 6. So check that before the game and think about it when we are playing lane. Very important to track her W and also her R cooldown. Alright, we're continuing to Yone. Yone is actually one of the easier matchups for Jayce because of how certain trading patterns interact. So we want to be starting with Doran's Blade and we want to be taking the Phase Rush rune page because Phase Rush is going to allow us to keep distance between us and Yone. And of course, as Yone is not onto us, we're going to be in a better position because we're a ranged character. It's that simple. Doran's Blade because we want to additional health, so Yone cannot really one-shot us. And the mindset that we want to adopt in this lane is we want to be really pressuring this Yone's level 1 to 5 because of the fact that we want to be making sure that we take good quality trades into him, and there's not much that he can do it against us if we take the Phase Rush rune page. So we're going to be looking to get trading patterns with our hammer form, with Phase Rush, and then get him off to us. The waves, we want to be going for a 3-stack. We do not really want to be going for a 2-wave crash because Yone can then play with the level 3 and zone us off the wave. That's going to be pretty dangerous. So a 3-wave stack is usually the way we want to be playing into Yone, unless he gives us a lot of damage early. As for certain trading patterns that we want to be keeping our eyes out on, we want to look for hammer form trades, Q, W, auto, E, slow him, bump him away, and then run away with our phase rush. That's the main trading pattern, and that's also why this matchup is so favored for Jayce. As for cooldowns, we want to be really keeping an eye on when Yone has Q3 and when he has E. If he has both Q3 and E, he wins. So that's when we need to be really backing off, and that's the only time we really need to respect in the lane. Also, post level 6, if he has R, keep it in mind, don't let him R us, don't let him get onto us. Especially if we don't have phase rush, because then we won't get him off of us and we're going to be in a lot of trouble. Right here, I disrespect the Q3 trading pattern of the Yone, and that puts me in a pretty bad position in the lane. So when he has Q3 and E, that's when we got to be careful, otherwise we practically auto-win the lane. So Jayce versus Yasuo is actually one of the crazier matchups in this matchup guide. And Yasuo was a matchup that I personally just really struggled with until I started watching professional players' VODs and really found a good understanding of how they approach the matchup. So what I did into Yasuo is I went phase rush or I went first strike. And what led to happening is that I just wasn't able to outdamage him and I wasn't able to win the lane against the Yasuo ever. I really struggled against this lane. So then I started watching pro VODs and these guys approach it completely different. These guys started Doran's Blade every single game and went to Conqueror Rune every single game. The reason for that is because this is the only way that we can win against the Yasuo. It's because we can stand our ground. So what we want to be doing is we want to be looking to play to harass the Yasuo and make his lane really hard. Contest the CS. We're watching a VOD of Zeka right here. He plays it beautifully. We can also start W into Yasuo because it gives us, with Conqueror, a lot of free Conqueror stacks. And if Yasuo starts E and he's onto us, we can also go into hammer form and use W. So we just get a lot of damage with the level 1 W into Yasuo. And then secondly, we want to be playing the waves in a way where we keep it slowly pushing into Yasuo or keep it somewhat neutral, where we can just have the goal of harassing him. And if he decides to push it, which a lot of Yasuos will do, just as in this matchup, is we can just abuse the fact that now the wave is pushing into us, and every single time he tries to lay his hands on the wave, we can actually just harass him with our abilities and auto attacks. And I really just want to be showing an example of in this VOD. I really just want you guys to watch of how Zeka plays this. And it's really important that we try to copy this in maybe 1v1s, because once we get a feeling of this, we'll actually get a good understanding of how to play this matchup. One thing to keep in mind, right, is if the Yasuo, if we're not feeling mechanically confident on Jayce, this is not a way we want to be playing the matchup. If we're not feeling confident on Jayce mechanically, what we should do is we should just go phase rush and we should play to avoid the lane rather than win it. But the way I'm going to be explaining right here is rather to win the matchup. Because I think once we get a hang of it, it's actually pretty consistently doable. If we watch all the pro player VODs, we're going to be seeing people consistently beat this lane in the mid lane, which is really impressive. So as we can see right here, we're just slow bowling a wave into Yasuo, and whenever he decides to walk up, we just go for a trade. Nothing too crazy. We don't want to be losing too much health. And Yasuo is going to try to freeze the wave on the side. This is a situation where we're going to be in very often. And this is a situation where I just want you guys to stand your ground. With Conqueror, we can stand our ground into Yasuo. That's the power of the rune that we take. If we take phase rush, if we take first strike, we cannot stand our ground against Yasuo. And that's when we're going to be in trouble. So this is an exact situation. Look how fast we stack the Conqueror and look how much damage we do. And we can actually just beat him in the extended all-in. And that's the main thing that we have to be aware of. Try it out in 1v1s and we'll be in a pretty good position. Jayce vs Irelia is a pretty tough matchup. The reason for that is because Irelia has a lot of kill threat onto Jayce. Not only in the lane, but also especially in the side lane. So there's a few things that we have to keep in mind that we want to be doing against an Irelia. First of all, starting items. We want to start with Doran's Blade. It gives us additional health, and that's gonna make us make it easier for us to survive against Aurelia's all-in potential. Moreover, we get the stats that we want in lane, and we get a little bit more of that early game power, which is going to allow us to take a little bit more control of the levels 1 and 2 over the Irelia, so we can actually get the wave into a position where we want it to be. As for the runes, we will practically always take phase rush against Irelia, because it will allow us to go for certain trading patterns that we can then get away with because of the move speed that otherwise we wouldn't have gotten. So the move speed that we get from phase rush is going to allow us to go for trading patterns with our hammer form, especially Q in, out attack her, and then E her away. And that's going to give us a lot of movement speed, which is going to let us be able to survive even if she lands an E. And even better, we can just dodge the E because of the high amount of move speed that we just get. So phase rush is practically a must-have into Irelia. So the mindset that we want to have against Irelia is we can actually bully her level 1 and 2. And after that, we kind of just want to play to skill and play together with our team. We don't really want to be getting into an isolated 1v1 with Aurelia, because she will just beat us. She's just stronger than us in the isolated 1v1. So how are we going to be playing the waves? So since we are stronger level 1 and 2, what we want to be doing is we want to get the push for the first 2 waves. We want to make a 2-wave crash onto Aurelia. If you're not sure how to do it, I've got a video about it on my YouTube, but a 2-wave crash is the best possible play into Aurelia, because we can then bully her levels 1 and 2 on wave 1 and 2 while we are stronger, and then once she becomes stronger, we can literally just let the wave come out into us. We can, after the crash, we can let it bounce out, and yes, we are gonna lose 1 or 2 CS, but that's okay, because it's a nice way to stay safe against Aurelia, because the wave is coming into us in the end anyway. That's the main thing that we want to understand, right? Is we do not want the wave to be frozen onto Aurelia's side. If we are able to accomplish that, we should be fine to minimize against Aurelia. So how do we actually beat the Aurelia? We beat her by poking her down over time and going for these non-committal Q auto attack E trades into her on hammer form, so we can then run out with phase rush. Once she hits Vamp though, we're in trouble, because then she's just gonna regenerate, and then we're mainly just trying to play for the waves. We're not really trying to play for the poke or to interact with her. We're just trying to get through the lane and possibly impact the game in different ways, either by priority or by skirmishing with our team. But the 1v1 is just really bloody tough against Aurelia. The main thing that we have to be careful about when we're playing against Aurelia is her ultimate. She can 100 to 0 us, even through phase rush and bone plating, if she has ultimate. If she doesn't have ultimate, it's very hard for her to do that, so it's very important for us to track her ultimate cooldown. Let me know if you guys have any questions about this matchup. It's a pretty tricky one, and I'll definitely get back to you. Next lane, Pantheon. Pantheon is one of the fighters that is actually pretty hard for Jayce to face. And the reason for that is because Pantheon's E works really well against Jayce's kit. Jayce is a champion that really revolves around a lot of burst damage. His Q is very linear, very bursty, and Pantheon's E can cancel out all of that damage. So what we want to be doing against Pantheon, of course, we want to be starting with Doran's Blade, and that will give us the additional health in lane needed to survive Pantheon's all-in combos, makes our lane a little bit stronger as well. As for runes, I think phase rush is the play in mid lane, because we want to keep him off bay and we want to be playing with our range advantage. As for the waves and with the mindset, right, we want to be basically taking opportunistic trades, but make sure that we stay healthy. That's just the most important thing. That's the mindset. Just stay healthy and try to avoid Pantheon when he has his fully empowered stacks, because he will just out-trade us. When it comes to waves, ideally we want to be holding the wave onto our side. That's not always going to be possible. In this example, I'm actually playing it really bad. My spacing is very off par. This was in the old patch, so I start with the old starting items as well. And I'm just in a lot of trouble in this matchup because of the fact that I give him too many free trades in the early game, which led to my health dropping low and me being in a pretty bad position. One thing to really keep in mind against Pantheon, right, is to make sure that we actually track his E cooldown. If his E is down, we can look for beautiful trades with our hammer form, where we can jump in, bump him out, and run away. But if his E is up, we gotta be very careful with that because he can just block the damage. Of course, sometimes we can do it because he's not gonna E it always. But most of the times, if we're playing against a somewhat decent player, he will be doing that. The good thing against Pantheon is that our poke is just going to be very, very valuable against him. He doesn't have much regeneration in his kit. So if we land a lot of pokes post level 6, starting level 7, we're going to be in a very, very good position. Also, if the enemies have a lot of AD, Tabis can be really good against Pantheon because it blocks out a lot of his burst threat. And if we are actually allowed to buy Tabis into Pantheon, he's going to struggle, especially in the 1v1. Because he then cannot one-shot us, and that's the strength that Pantheon does have over Jayce, is he can actually look to one-shot us if we misposition. So we gotta be very, very careful about that. Next up, we're gonna be going towards the mages category. And we're gonna be starting off with Aurelion Sol, because this is actually a very surprisingly good matchup for Jayce, mainly because of the fact that he can run Phase Rush into Aurelion Sol. Phase Rush is really, really, really good into ASol because it allows Jayce to actually run out of Aurelion Sol's E. And Jayce's Hammer Form E can actually cancel Aurelion Sol dash and his Q. So our kit just generally works well against Aurelion Sol. This is a perfect example of a trading pattern, what we can use into Aurelion Sol. Use the Phase Rush to get a quick burst damage, bump him out of his Q, and then run away. Another thing into Aurelion Sol is our starting item. I think this patch, I haven't really played ASol against ASol on this patch as Jayce, but this patch I would probably start Doran's Blade because we're just looking to get the strongest lane that we can get into Aurelion Sol because we want to be playing to win. Our mindset is to play to win into Aurelion Sol. Are we going to be able to consistently beat him first base? Yes and no, because usually Aurelion Sol is just gonna be able to just survive because we don't have too much damage. He's gonna be able to get a good first reset off, TP back. But once we get some levels, once we get level 4, level 5, and we get a tier and a longsword, possibly even serrated dirk, once we get to that point, that's when we can really start beating the crap out of an Aurelion Sol. And that's when we really want to be utilizing our hammer form trading patterns into him to really make his life really, really hard. Very good matchup. Feel free to play aggressive in this matchup at any stage of the game. And if we are able to snowball into Aurelion Sol, it's just really, really tough for him to play. And this is the trading pattern that we want to be going for, really utilizing the Phase Rush movement speed. And Aurelion Sol is just going to be struggling. Jayce versus Orianna in 3 minutes. So Jayce versus Orianna is actually one of Jayce's hardest matchups. Why? Orianna has the possibility to bully Jayce in lane. She has a bit longer range with her abilities. She has slows and CCs in her kit, which makes it really hard for Jayce to go into hammer form. And in the late game, Orianna skills just as well, if not better, as Jayce. So in this matchup, what is my experience? How do we play this? If Orianna takes Ahri, we are practically forced to go Doran's Shield, otherwise we will get wrecked in the lane. If she goes Phase Rush, we are fine going Doran's Blade. As for setup, what rune setup do we want to take? We can either go Phase Rush if we want to be playing it a bit more fast and think the game goes a bit faster and we're looking to skirmish a bit more. Phase Rush is really good into Orianna because it denies her slows, it denies her CC. And we actually get additional trading windows with hammer form into the Orianna. But if we plan to scale, because, for example, we have a very passive jungle matchup and the enemy jungler is very aggressive, then First Strike is also completely fine. And then we're just playing for poke into the mid to late game because our QE poke actually does outrange the Orianna. And it's pretty hard for Orianna to play against that poke as well. So how do we actually play this lane? In my experience and in my opinion, we should always play this lane slow. We cannot win this lane if the Orianna is as good or better than us. The only time we can win this lane by playing fast is if we are mechanically way better than the enemy opponent. So if you take a look at, for example, Knight Jayce or Chovy Jayce, they will play this matchup aggressive. They will play it fast, but we are not Knight, we are not Chovy. So we'll only literally handicap ourselves if we do it the way they do it. So that's also what I'm recommending, right? Try to avoid the Ori Q, try to keep our farm high and make sure that our first and possibly also second reset is proper. Because that way we can actually get to the point where we can match or even be stronger than Orianna. So That's exactly what I'm doing right here. Orianna is currently taking a reset. She TP back, and this wave comes in at a pretty awkward moment. So the reason I take D-Shield is because right now I'm very healthy. I can then trade my HP to get this wave in because I want to take my reset as well. I get a beautiful reset on 880 gold, which means that I can get tier, I can get refillable potion, I can get a longsword. I'm in a very happy position at this point in the lane. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to get to my serrated Dirk, and then I'm going to start poking Orianna from a distance, staying outside of her range, keeping my farm high and scaling into the mid game. That is the most consistent and best possible way to play into Orianna. Don't fall under the illusion of action, because this is one of the prime champions that will punish you for it unless you're way better than the enemy laner. Let me know if you guys have any questions about this matchup. So Jayce versus Syndra in 3 minutes. Jayce versus Syndra is actually very similar as Jayce to Orianna, but Syndra has her E in her kit. So when it comes to starting items, if Syndra takes Airy, we have to take Door and Shield, otherwise we're going to get clapped. If Syndra takes First Strike or Phase Rush, we can actually opt in for either Doran's Blade, or we can opt in for Longsword with refillable potion, depending on how you want to be playing the lane. In my experience, playing the lane fast into Syndra can be really tricky because we cannot really use hammer form unless Syndra makes a mistake. The most important part to understand is that if Syndra's E is down, the lane is ours. If Syndra's E is up, the lane is hers. So it's hers to lose and it's ours to win. We're completely fine scaling against the Syndra, especially when it comes to the late laning phase. Once we hit level 7, we should be able to beat her, especially with the poke. Therefore, it's fine to take the first strike setup if we are playing for that point in the game. I usually like to go the first strike setup into Syndra. I think poking her out is the most consistent strategy rather than taking Phase Rush. Even though Phase Rush is still takeable, but it mainly capitalizes onto Syndra making that mistake with her E. So, in my opinion, playing the lane slow as well is the correct call. Once we have refillable potion, tier, and Dirk, we can really start poking her out, and there's not much that Syndra can do against it. And once we hit 2 QE combos onto her face, it's actually really hard for her to trade. But always keep in mind, right, that if she messes up her E, that's when the trading windows is ours. Also, level 1, right, what we can do is we can actually use Hammer Q to avoid one of her balls that she tries to throw onto us. And if she mistethers, we can also use that to dodge her ball and jump on her. Level 1, we can get a lot of advantages against Syndra if she messes up and comes too closely to us, what even happens all the way up until Master Elo. So definitely look out for stuff like that. If you guys have any other questions, let me know. That's the basics of Jayce versus Syndra. So the only time we're actually going to be able to play fast into Syndra as well is when we are mechanically better than the Syndra. If she is just as good or better than us mechanically, we will get exposed in the lane. So my recommendation is to default towards a slow playstyle, because we really become stronger once we hit that Dirk tier refillable power spike, because we can then start poking her and it's very hard for her to do anything in return. And if we try to play too fast, we might get exposed. And especially if we try to use hammer form in while Syndra has her E up, we're going to get absolutely out-traded and we're going to have a miserable lane. So Jayce versus Neeko is actually one of the harder Jayce matchups that you can play, because of the fact that Neeko beats you in the lane, she beats you in the 2v2s, and it's very easy for her to play the skirmishes to counter Jayce, because she has the ability to engage and forms very high threat upon him. So the reason why this is a really annoying matchup as well is because in the lane, Neeko actually has the ability to poke you out heavily with her short cooldown on the Q. What kind of starting items do we take? We always take Door and Shield against Neeko. Neeko is too strong in the early lane to not take Door and Shield against. We need to respect her, because if she is a good Neeko and she will be landing a lot of her Qs, we're gonna struggle in general. It's also really important, in my opinion, that we take second wind against Neeko. If we do not take second wind, we're gonna get absolutely bullied and we're gonna really struggle. As for the runes, we can take both First Strike and Phase Rush. In my opinion, the most consistent one is Phase Rush plus Resolve Secondary. I've had the most success with that one, but you could theoretically also run First Strike with Secondary Resolve, but it's a bit... it doesn't synergize too well. I really like to have the sorcery tree in general on Jayce, and I think First Strike gives us a lot of possibilities also with trading patterns, because what happens with Neeko is she's going to be very reliant around her Q, and she needs to get into range to Q, and we can possibly, if she mis-tethers, go onto her with hammer form and start trading into the Neeko. And phase rush really helps with it. The mindset that we want to have in this matchup is that we want to minimize, because we cannot really play to win. If you see, for example, Knight play Jayce against Neeko, he'll play to win, but that's because he's mechanically so confident that he's able to dodge Neeko Qs and Neeko Es, that unless we are able to do that, it's practically impossible to play that fast against a Neeko, because her damages are just way higher in this stage of the game. When it comes to waves, if we can get the early push, it's good, because that's gonna force Neeko to pay a bit more attention towards last hitting. But if we cannot get the early push, we shouldn't try to force it. Just let yourself get pushed in. Try to CS. The most important thing is that our first reset is really good. When our first reset is really good, we get, for example, tier plus longsword and refillable potion. We're actually in a pretty good position. Because the most important thing in this matchup is that we get our resets correctly, that we don't miss out on too many minions. It's pretty hard for Neeko to kill us, but she will be poking us out over and over and over again. And a final tip that I really have is that we gotta run mercs pretty quickly. The faster we have mercs, the easier it is for us to survive in this lane. Neeko in general really gets countered by mercs because her poke is all flat magic damage. And the mercs also works really well against her E CC and her ult CC. So mercs is a go-to. And then on a final note, we can also dodge out on her Q by using our hammer form Q, so we can respond in towards her queuing. But that's really hard to do, and that's only really something that we can feasibly, consistently do in the very high elos. Very tough matchup. I understand if you guys have any questions about this, let me know and I'll definitely get back to you. So, starting items. I think if we want to be playing a bit faster, we go for Doran's Blade. I think in general, Doran's Blade is probably the best one to take into Cassiopeia. And if we want to be playing first strike and want to be very scaly, we could also go longsword refillable potion, depending on what you prefer. I think phase rush is in general the best rune page into Cassiopeia, because Cassio, of course, relies heavily onto her W slow to get a lot of E-procs onto you, and possibly even a Q after she lands her W slow. And phase rush actually allows us to actually utilize our hammer form trading pattern into Cassiopeia, which if we do not run phase rush, going hammer form and queuing into Cassiopeia is usually just ending up killing yourself. So I like phase rush. It gives us much more options into the lane, and if we feel comfortable and confident, we can actually play with the mindset of trying to outplay the Cassiopeia. It is definitely good to have the wave slowly shoving into you in the early game, because if the wave is stuck onto her side, we're gonna have a really rough time actually getting it in, and we're gonna also have a really rough time trading onto her. Because if she's on the long lane, she just exerts a lot of threat onto us. One very crucial to know micro interaction that there is against Cassiopeia is if we're fast, she can actually react to our Q, us jumping into her. But if she's not fast enough and she slightly hesitates, what we can do is we can quickly turn around after jumping in and dodge her ultimate. This is something that you'll see the best Jayces do consistently into Cassiopeia. They'll dodge her ultimate by very fast Q usage and then looking away. It's a very important trick to actually start getting these solo kills and really start beating Cassiopeia in lane. But most consistently, this is just going to be a pretty tricky matchup in the lane. We usually just want to be playing from a distance and play to poke the Cassiopeia post level 6, 7. That's usually when she's going to be struggling, because we just completely outrange her. And that's the most basically consistent way to beat a Cassiopeia. Next up, we got Viktor. Viktor is actually one of the matchups I played a lot into as Jayce. I got counterpicked a lot by Viktor. And what we have to understand against Viktor is starting items, we just want to be taking Doran's Blade if Viktor opts in for First Strike. But if Viktor opts in for an early game setup with Ahri, we want to be taking Doran's Shield and possibly even Second Wind as well, because his poke is going to be very, very oppressive. Viktor is a lane bully with that setup, and we just need the regeneration, man. Otherwise, we're just going to be poked out and we're going to be in a miserable state. So if Viktor decides to opt in for First Strike or Phase Rush or something like that, we can play aggressive. We can play with our Phase Rush, because that's the rune that we want to be taking into Viktor. Phase Rush gives us a lot of options and opportunities into these mages like Viktor, because we are going to be able to utilize our Hammer Form trading pattern into the Viktor, and we are also going to be able to dodge out onto his gravity field. So his gravity field is actually, if he puts that down and we jump onto the Viktor and we don't have Phase Rush, we will get stunned up by it, and we will get actually, if he has ult, we will get murdered by his ultimate. But if we have Phase Rush, we can actually run out of his stun and therefore also avoid a lot of damage. So in my opinion, Phase Rush is just generally the best rune into Viktor. As for our mindset, right, it really depends on what rune Viktor takes. If he takes early game setup with Ahri, we just want to chill, we just want to scale, hit our item spikes. But if he takes a bit more scaling rune, we actually can play to contest him in the lane. As for waves, if we can get the push into Viktor, it can be nice to get it, because he then struggles by answering the wave state, while we can actually avoid the lane a little bit or create some trading opportunities. But usually most of the times he's going to be able to get the push into us, and then we got to be a little bit careful. That's okay. We want to be then just letting ourselves get pushed in and then play with the bounce, try to crash the bounce and go for a reset afterwards. Final thing, trading patterns, right? Really utilize the Phase Rush like this. We want to use a very important point right here is that we want to be using the Cannon E. So look how I use this Cannon E, use it as move speed, run at the Viktor right here, get my other abilities off, get the Phase Rush move speed, and then run away. And that makes trading really, really hard for him in return towards us, because we're just so fast, we're onto him, and then suddenly we're not anymore. That's usually the way we want to be playing against Viktor. All right, next up we got Vladimir. Vladimir is a very interesting matchup because our mindset shifts a lot depending on what state of the matchup we are in. So before first base, it's going to be a pretty tricky matchup. Vladimir is a lane that will actually beat us because of his ability to out-sustain us, our low damage in the early game. So pre-first reset, we actually want to be playing to deny the lane a little bit by avoid the lane, make sure that we don't engage in too many trades, play to actually have the wave a bit neutral, just play to milk your first reset a little bit. After our first reset, that's when the fun begins. That's when we can really start beating Vladimir, because we then have some items, we then have some mana, and our trading patterns then really start hurting onto him, which is something that we're also going to be seeing in this VOD right here. We're just going to completely out-damage and stat check the Vladimir from this point. We're then also going to be getting wave control in our kit, which is something that Vladimir will lack. So we'll then just be able to permanently push the Vladimir in, have proper vision, so we can start warding and leaning. And then it's just going to be very hard for Vladimir to play, because he's just going to be responding towards us all the time. So that's the way we want to be playing the waves. As for starting items, we could go for Doran's Blade. We could also go for Longsword Refillable if we especially want to play the lane really slow early. It doesn't really matter. But our mindset in the lane, as for runes, by the way, I think we can also go for Phase Rush or First Strike, depending on what the enemy composition asks from us. The mindset in the lane, pre-first reset, we want to be playing it slow. We want to be playing to avoid certain trades. But post-first reset, that's when we can really start pressuring him. As for his cooldowns, really be aware of his W cooldown. His W is an extremely long cooldown. If he doesn't have it up, or if we're able to bait it out one way or another, we can actually deal massive damage towards him. So his W cooldown is the main cooldown to be careful about. Same as his Q3. We can see when his big Q is coming up. If he has his big Q coming up, don't come close. Don't engage into trades with Vladimir. Only trade when his big Q is down post first reset. Once we get to that point, matchup should be pretty smooth sailing. It's actually pretty easy from that point because we just have advantages that Vladimir struggled to deal with in the lane. Next up, we got Taliyah. Taliyah is a matchup that is very fascinating in my opinion. It's a matchup that we can play both fast and both slow. The thing is with Taliyah is that it just really depends on what we want to be doing ourselves. We can beat her early because Taliyah is not the strongest early game champion. In that case, we want to opt in for Phase Rush and we want to opt in for Doran's Blade. But we can also play to scale with First Strike, and in that case we want to be starting Refillable Potion with Longsword to be very gold efficient. And then we also want to be looking to play with First Strike and play a bit more pokey instead of a bit more skirmishy in the game. Both playstyles completely valid on what you think is the right call in the certain game state. As for our mindset into Taliyah, it really depends on what we want to be doing, but usually we just want to be playing to win in the early game. Really be careful of her big boulder Qs and try to track her Q cooldown and E cooldown. Pretty high cooldowns, especially on the E in the early game. And if she doesn't have E, feel free to just jump in and look for certain trading patterns onto her, because it's very hard for her to play back once we are onto her. We'll just completely out damage her. So if she wastes E, feel free to jump onto her. As for waves, in my opinion, it's good if we can get early wave priority, because if we get early wave priority, we can actually pressure her with abilities when she's trying to respond towards the wave. Of course, Taliyah has a lot of wave clear. We're not always going to be able to get the push into her. And that's also going to be completely fine, because in that case, we can just respond. And maybe if the wave's on our side, we can actually look for a Q in, which is also really good into Taliyah. As for trading patterns, as I said, right, mainly play when she wastes her E. That's when we have the easiest time in the lane. And otherwise, we can just play on range and play to poke the Taliyah, because we have just way longer range, especially starting level 6, level 7. We can just abuse our lane advantage, our range advantage, to get a lead in the lane and really pressure her out of it. Because the fun fact about Taliyah is she's really squishy, and every bit of poke that we land onto her will stick onto her. That's a very, very good thing to always keep in mind. So if we cannot really beat her early because she lanes well or whatever, that's going to be completely fine. We can just start poking her afterwards, and we're going to be in a great position in the lane. That's what I've found against Taliyah. Usually I just win the games by poking her out with our extended range. That's what's going to give us wave control. We're just then going to be able to shove the wave, move into fog, start poking her, and it's going to be very hard for her to play into that. Next up, Zoe. Against Zoe, we want to be starting with Doran's Blade because we really value the additional HP that we get from the item. Zoe has a lot of burst damage and will be looking to kill us, so the health is going to be very helpful against any potential bubbles that she will land onto us. As for runes, we can opt in for Phase Rush, but we can also opt in for First Strike depending on what you think is good given the game state against the enemy team. Against Zoe, right, the mindset in the early game is to basically get a good first reset off. Most Zoes will run Ignite, so she will have a lot of kill threat. She will also be able to just completely demolish you in trades because of how strong Zoe is in the early game. And if we're able to get a good initial reset off and possibly even make her force her onto a bad reset because of the fact that she runs Ignite, we can actually get a lead in the lane, because we're not going to really be able to get it in the early lane with other means of trading. She's too strong, too oppressive. As for waves, we do not want the wave to get stuck on her side. We want her to slowly push into us in the early lane, which is what most Zoes will do, which is fine for us, because that way we can actually just extend the lane, avoid her taking trades onto us by just standing back. Because if we have the wave stuck onto Zoe's side, she can just flash onto us, bubble us, chase us down the long lane with her W passive, and it's just very, very hard to play against. If she lands one bubble when the wave's on her side, she'll probably just kill us with all the sums available for her. After our first reset, we want to be playing with our range, and as major cooldown that we want to be really thinking about is Zoe's E. If Zoe does not have her bubble, if she doesn't have E, we can actually use our hammer form and Q in onto her, because she cannot really respond then. But if she has E, we cannot really jump onto her, because she will just bubble us and we will die. So it's very important that we track her E cooldown accordingly, because it's going to be the difference between staying alive or being dead. That's also the case in the early lane. Really dodge out onto her E. If we aren't able to do that, we're just going to die and we're going to lose the lane. It sounds bad, and it is, actually, it is. The thing with Zoe is she's going to struggle a bit later into the game. Her skirmishing is usually, in the early game, very good, but once it gets to team fights, it's really hard to play Zoe, and it's really hard once some people on your team start getting MR. A little trick against Zoe is, right, if you get bubbled, right, it is going to happen like once or twice in the lane, even if we're playing really well. If we get bubbled, always change towards hammer form. It grants us extra resistances, and it can be the difference between her being able to one-shot us or us being able to stay alive from her insanely high burst damage. But main thing, just stay out of her range, especially her bubble range. Try to bait out her bubble. Post first reset, look for poke, because Zoe is also going to struggle the lower she will be. Survive. Just survive. Zoe is really, really strong in the early game, and if we're able to survive, we're usually going to be in a pretty good position. Mercs can be really good against Zoe because it reduces the cooldown of her, or like the uptime of her bubble onto you, so you have more time to run away after she lands your bubble. Especially in level 7, when she doesn't have much CDR, she usually cannot really get a Q onto you if she used it before that. But yeah, we just want to be really, really careful in this lane. All right, moving on to the stock standard pro play matchup, Jayce versus Azir. Jayce versus Azir is pretty tricky in a way that it really depends on a lot of variables how this matchup will go. If Azir takes Hill of Blades and he takes early game runes, in my experience, it's really, really hard to beat Azir in lane, and we're going to be struggling post level 6 because of Azir's insanely high threat. But if Azir actually opts in for a bit more scaling setup, we can actually beat the Azir, because then he's just not that strong in the early lane. So it's just really dependent on what the Azir does as well. Usually, as Jayce, we want to be starting Doran's Blade with just a potion. And we can both run First Strike or Phase Rush depending on how we want to be how fast we want to be playing the matchup. If we want to be playing a bit faster in the early game, feel free to go Phase Rush because it allows for some creative trading patterns. But if we're mainly going to be playing for poke in the mid game, First Strike is usually going to be better. We're completely fine and completely able to skill up against Azir, hit our power spikes before he does. The main thing about this matchup, right, is the mindset that we want to adopt really depends on his setup in the early game. And that also is really going to affect the way we're going to be playing the waves. If he opts in for a bit more of a scaling setup like he does in this game, even though I did as well, we can actually look to put some pressure onto him by pushing the wave into him. But if he takes a strong early game setup, we got to be a bit careful, and it's okay to keep the wave neutral or just let the wave come into us in that case. If we get a very nice first reset off, we're usually in a very good position. And when it comes to micro interactions that we have to be very careful about against Azir is once he reaches level 6, he is very threatening to us. Not necessarily that he alone is going to be able to kill us. No, usually he's going to be doing that with his jungler. So it's very important that we have correct threat assessment at that point in the game. And if we do have correct threat assessment at that point in the game, we're going to be fine. But if we get, Jayce is in general very vulnerable to ganks and to jungle ganks, jungle attention. So if Azir actually gets his level 6 and is able to get a few Shurima shuffles into us, where we don't have flash and we step up in the lane, we're just gonna die. But if we ever get lane control into Azir, where we just are able to get the wave push constantly and duck into Fog of War, start poking him because Azir's range isn't too high as well, we're actually in a really good position. So that would be the thing that we would be aiming to do. Just play nice, fundamental Jayce League of Legends and we should be in a good position. Moving on, we're going to be going to Xerath. Xerath is a matchup that I actually have not played. But I got a lot of requests from it from a lot of viewers, so I decided to still include it and watch how the pro players play it. So we're currently watching a VOD of Zeka, And he takes as starting items, he takes Doran's Shield. Makes sense. The way Xerath beats enemies is by poking them down. So if we're going to be able to deny a lot of that poke, we're going to be in a very good position. We can run Phase Rush as well, because that's going to allow us to actually jump onto the Xerath and get very mean trades into him. But I'm pretty sure that First Strike should also be completely doable. As for the mindset, what I really see is that we as Jayce, if we take Doran's Shield and we feel comfortable, right, we can actually start pushing into Xerath and we can actually put some pressure onto him. Xerath really struggles farming on the tower, and his early game wave control is very mediocre. It really starts to get online post Lost Chapter, because that's when he really can spam his abilities. But the early game is just not that good. So we can actually pressure him by taking the wave priority, let him answer towards the wave, and that can put us in a position where we can actually take very good quality trades into the Xerath. So you can see Zeka right here plays it really, really aggressive, really fast, and it works out pretty decently. Even though he got a pretty greedy dive. But as we can see, if we can go back right here, right? Right here, he's just in a beautiful position in the lane. That's just no doubt about it. And if he plays it a bit slower and he respects Xerath flashing his Q, he's just in a completely winning position. So this is the way that you just want to be consistently playing into Xerath. Push him in the early game, take Doran's Shield, and just take Phase Rush because it allows for more trading patterns. Of course, right, once he reaches a certain point, which is Lost Chapter usually, what we want to be doing is we just want to be playing from Fog of War, make sure that we get the wave priority over him. Once he uses his abilities, there's quite a decent amount of cooldown onto it. We want to be then abusing that to actually get the wave prio, and then dug into Fog of War after we've got the priority, and then start poking him down. Of course, for trading patterns, we got to be a bit careful with our Q usage. If we Q onto minions or if we Q into him, he can of course respond with his E, which is pretty easy to land then. And if he gets a stun, he can then get a big burst trade onto us. So be careful with our Q usage. But if you're comfortable with it and you feel a bit confident, you can definitely get away with going for certain Q usage, Qs onto the Xerath. I almost wanted to say Azir. Doesn't make sense. Because of course, Xerath's E also has a cast time, so it isn't instantaneous, and he can miss it, or we can duke it out. We can maybe go for a Q and then combine it with an instant sidestep towards top or down, and we might be able to dodge his Q with it and put him in a very awkward position. So this matchup, it will get a lot easier once we run Doran's Shield. Otherwise, we're going to really struggle into his poke, because Xerath can actually usually outranges us unless we have, of course, a Shock Blast plus E combo. And that's when Jayce really struggles into poke if he doesn't have the... I can't come on the word. If he doesn't have the regeneration to deal with it. But Doran's Shield really helps with that. So that's going to be the final matchup that we cover in this guide, and I haven't covered every single matchup. We've covered most of them, so if you guys have any questions about the matchup that is not covered in this guide, feel free to chuck a comment into it, and what I'll do is I'll actually do some research and I'll make sure to reply to it with my knowledge that I have. So feel free to just hit me up and I'll definitely be able to help you out. Thank you guys for watching. Leave a like if you guys enjoyed. I put the timestamps in the description, so just check it out whenever you play against a certain matchup, so you'll know. And I hope you guys enjoy. See you guys later with a new video.